Coming up next, Andy from Black Veil Brides on the show. I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. We get into everything from his love of Kiss and W.A.S.P to sobriety and everything in between. Andy from Black Veil Brides coming up next on the show. Welcome to the show, Andy Biersack from Black Veil Brides. How are you, my man?
Doing good. How are you doing?
Great to see you. On tour tonight. Exciting, right?
Tonight here in New York City. A venue that every single time I've ever played in my career has a different name. So
what is it tonight?
It was tonight. It's the Palladium.
Okay.
It's been many other things, all corporate names. So I'm glad they finally they decided to get rid of the corporate name. Now it's just the Palladium.
And the shows, I think you're on tour for like another 2 weeks or so. That's exciting.
Yeah. We end in LA and then got a little bit of time and then we head back out over the late summer or early fall. So.
Do you feel like a special connection to LA? I know that you moved there when you were like 17 or so, but do you have a special connection?
You know, it's strange. I vacillate between considering myself someone who is from Los Angeles in the capacity that I was there so long, and then also feeling like I never belonged in the city. You know what I mean? I lived there ostensibly from the time I was 16. I was there almost full time, and then throughout all of my teen years I moved out when I was 30. So,
bit of a lonely place though, right?
It's just, I never felt like an Angelino. It's funny because my cousin who I grew up with, he moved out at a similar time. And over the years, he has become an Angelino. He goes to the farmers markets. Yeah. You know, he loves it there. I always felt like it's such a place of obviously it's very transient and there's not many people aren't from there, but I never felt a connection. So the one thing that always tied me to there is the band has always had such a connection. And when we play shows in Los Angeles, it feels like a homecoming, you know, and the audience for us there, it happened for us there before anywhere else. We were playing in the back of Tony Alva's skate shop in the parking lot to people. Before anybody accepted us anywhere. So while I always felt a little bit like a stranger in a strange land, LA accepted us and took to us before anywhere else did.
But early on, let's talk about the fact you started in Ohio early on. And I think you spent a lot of time in Kentucky too, right?
Yeah.
So Ohio, like some great bands from there. The Black Keys were just on the show. Yeah. Obviously from there, Devo. I think so many great bands like Stib Bader's, maybe the Lords of New Church, or the Dead Boys.
Dead Boys era,
right?
But ultimately became Lords of New Church.
Yeah. So talk to me about growing up and how you eventually got into this. Like early on, I know music was all around you. Your dad was into amazing music growing up, right? The Crew and Kiss and stuff like that.
He was in punk bands, kind of in a similar style to like Stiff Little Fingers. So, awesome. I always joked that, it's funny because when people meet my dad, he's got full sleeve tattoos, and I grew up with.
It's like a big version of you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I grew up with a very different. Compared to the other people around me, my understanding of whether it was musically or politically or whatever else, it was always kind of seen through the prism of that. And my mom also was very much into music and art and poems, and I was just always raised around it. So I think that also contributed a little bit to my outsider feeling as a kid, because within the context of my home, it was like this bubble. Then I'd go outside and it was very different, contextually, because particularly at the time I'm growing up, we're talking W. Bush administration in Cincinnati. It wasn't particularly progressive socially. Yeah. So the things that I was being raised on were very different than the things that were happening around us. And maybe it started this kind of outsider mentality that I had. But, I was introduced to, and also my dad went to CCM, which is College Conservatory of Music. He was a musical theater major. My mom was really into writing and creativity in general. So I just always had that be a part of my life.
Did you hear Kiss early on and just say, this is something I want to do? Did you see the make? It was actually it was after the makeup, I believe, right?
Well, I found them through his 70s trading cards. That was my introduction.
Amazing.
We had a shoebox in the basement of our first house, and it had some of my dad's belongings from his adolescence, and there was sports stuff, whatever. But then there were, 30 to 40 Kiss trading cards in there, and I don't know, those sort of watershed moments that happen in movies where somebody sees something and then it's that like pivotal thing that changes their life. It really was transformative for me because I loved superheroes and I loved the music on the radio that my mom would, to and from, preschool or whatever. But this was the first time that all those things were combined, and I'm looking at this, Love Gun era Gene Simmons with the blood on his face and the studded bass, and this was when he still had like the horns on top of the costume, and it just seemed like was this a person? Is this a superhero? Like, what is this? And I was just all in, and then it became dress up like this every day when I got home from school, beg my dad to do the Kiss makeup on me. And then
How old are you at that point? Are you 14 or 15?
No, I'm 5 or 6.
5 or 6?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
There's as soon as I got home from kindergarten, first grade, it was everything. So
it was early
around
on.
that time is when 96, so I'm 5, they got back together in the original lineup.
Right.
And then Kiss is everywhere, right? So then it's just like, I'm going to the store and they're on the cover of Spin. They're everywhere. Yeah. So it was a big thing, and that then led to, you like that? Well, how about this? And then it was AC/DC and Aerosmith and, everything W.A.S.P, as we talked about beforehand. And then it was punk rock, Misfits, Lord's the New Church, Stiff Little Fingers, The Damned, all that kind of stuff.
Your mom was not into this kind of music.
My mom was, she didn't hate it, but she was into, her number one artist was Bruce Springsteen, which is, I would say for me, the artist I listened to the most in my life. The artist I've stolen the most from
Springsteen.
On a
really?
lyrical perspective. Tattoos, Springsteen is if there were two minds that I wanted to mold myself after creatively, it's Bruce Springsteen and Penn Jillette, the magician.
Yeah, because I don't think like Sweeney Todd and Springsteen.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. Look, if you listen to, from a lyrical point of view, if you listen to a lot of what Bruce is writing about, he speaks on revenge, and Sweeney Todd is the revenge-sicle. So there's a lot of through lines. I've always viewed that the issue that I had with glam rock or 80s rock was how literal everything was. Sure. I loved the iconography, but I wanted the songs to be saying something. And so often, as a kid, I couldn't relate to the idea that this music is going to be about how we're all the coolest people in the whole world. Because I didn't feel like the coolest person in the whole world. But when I listened to, Born to Run, I was a kid who wanted to get out of this small town, and I wanted other things, and Jungle Land, and these big, larger-than-life things. And that appealed to me so much more. So the goal was, for Black Veil, it was the lyrical content of Springsteen, the musical style of, say, like a Metallica, and the vocal style of Mike Ness from Social Distortion. That was my first sort of vision of what I wanted to do. And I think, to a certain degree, we've gotten to some degree where that is.
Other than Guns N' Roses, I don't think the lyrics were getting that deep in the 80s, right? Motley Crue had Looks to Kill, Shout at the Devil, but we weren't going deep.
And it's nothing against, like, say, Nicky's a great writer, but it just didn't appeal to me I was a very emotional kid, and I wanted something that would make me think or make me consider the human condition. And I wasn't getting that from these 80s bands, which I loved from a musical perspective and a show perspective. But that's when punk rock changed everything, because I had gone to the Kiss, Aerosmith, AC/DC, these shows where the show is, the songs are fun, everybody sings along, and look at all the shit that's blowing up behind us, right? And then I would go to Warped Tour, and 2002 was my first Warped Tour.
Sure.
And I'm seeing these bands, AFI and Dropkick Murphys and Rancid, and they don't have anything blowing up around them. Right. But their emotion that they're delivering and the passion of the performance, and Davey Havok is just basically a whirlwind around the stage, like a tornado. And that was what changed it for me, was you can have something more substantive to say, and you can have shit blow up around you, and that's sort of the dream, right?
Even before that, was your dad getting into the Misfits and things like that? Because that was earlier.
So my dad, his band did some touring. He played at CBGB's a number of times.
Amazing.
And played with the original Misfits and Rick Ocasek from the Cars and a bunch of other artists over the years. So that was always kind of spoon-fed to me to a certain degree, was the punk rock side of things. My dad, there's pictures of him when he was my age wearing the priest outfit and the razor blades around his ears and, the tattoos and everything. So I was always very inspired by that. And I'm an only child, so everything that was theirs became everything that was me. When you're an only child and you're not a particularly social person, you spend so much time with your parents that you can't help but, part of the whole gestation experience of becoming an adult is to take in all the stuff that you learn.
Definitely.
And I was very lucky that they treated me like an adult, and that we laughed at the same stuff, whether it was, letting me watch Mr. Show with Bob and David when I was like 8, or, and then explaining contextually those things to me, or the politics of the day, or whatever it was. I was always part of everything in my home. And so I didn't rebel against those interests. I wanted to kind of harness them and bring them into my own.
But when you go to school and you're, whatever it may be, at that point, 14, 15, you're getting bullied because you're listening to stuff like Motley Crue and AC/DC, or the kids like, you're in Ohio. I don't know how many people were listening to that at that point, or the kids kind of embracing that.
I think I was just weird to everybody.
Yeah.
You know, and it was beyond the stuff I listened to. I was just an odd kid. I'm an odd adult.
Yeah.
You know,
So am I.
I'm a hard person to talk to.
Not really.
Well, in that I don't ever let you talk.
Right.
No, I think that the biggest thing was I was just sort of such an outsider to everything. And I you know, whether it was the ADHD or whatever you want to say, I struggled to relate to other people. And the only through line that I had to connect to anybody was sports. So I played every sport. And I was really good at every sport. But I was joked I was the only kid who's like mascara was running underneath my helmet, you know.
Right.
But even then, on those teams, I had like Misfits patches on my gear, and you know, I was just I could never figure out a way in with other people, and so the bullying made it so I felt so isolated. But the advice that my dad gave me when I was a kid, and ultimately manifested in me sort of going overboard with it as an adult, but essentially the idea was within the context of this bubble, you can be whatever you want, but when you go outside, you can't expect everybody to agree with everything that you think or say. And you have to be prepared to defend yourself for those choices that you make. And if you want to go to school at 15 dressed as Alex from A Clockwork Orange,
Right. There might be a fight.
yeah, with a cane and the crotch piece in the eye, which I did,
Right.
or match my eyeshadow to my shoe color or whatever. Like, people might give you shit, and you have to be willing to stand up for yourself. And that was always, to me, the sort of the moral through line that ran through the early part of my career, and why if you Google me, you see me yelling at people so often. And it was about, if you're going to be what you want, be prepared to stand up for it and believe in it. And if you aren't, then the expectation that everyone else is going to agree with all of your choices is a lovely sort of idyllic world, but it's very unlikely. So be strong in your convictions and who you are. And that also made it so I ended up getting kicked out of several schools, and didn't even finish high school. So I have no high school education, no GED, nothing. I dropped out and just started touring.
But it's hard to imagine you weren't the popular kid. I think they used to call you Chunk, which is, again, when you look at, you kind of look like a model. So, but at the end of the day, like, you could model. So it's weird that people would not.
I was a little bit of the ugly duckling thing,
Yeah.
right? And I hate that term, but I was definitely an awkward kid. And I always had this sort of sensibility about me. And I found out that since I was funny, I could make people laugh, right? So that was sort of my in. But I was only ever seen as like the funny, chubby guy, right? Who like was lagging behind everybody else. I was never popular. I was never seen as, you know, girls never talked to me when I was young. And then the I suppose negative thing that happened was that when I went to theater school, I shot up in height, and I suddenly was, you know, popular, so to speak, and I totally let it go to my head. And then that started the like 10-year period of me being one of the top tier assholes of the world. And then, you know, by mid to late 20s, I started to taper down into being less of a piece of shit, so to speak. But yeah, I kind of went a little nuts when people were like, "Hey, you're good looking," or "Hey, let's talk." I was like, "Oh my God, I've never gotten attention before. I'm going to be an egotistical asshole for a decade."
At 15 or 16.
Yeah.
So at that point, you just mentioned theater school. So you got into Sweeney Todd, and early on, that's kind of, even before you started a band, that's kind of what inspired you, right?
Yeah, it was, I mentioned before, you know, I struggled with a lot of stuff with mental health as a kid. And one of the things that really was difficult for me was ultimately what is, you know, known as like OCD or anxiety. Obviously those are mutually things that can coexist, but for me it manifested in a lot of fears of things as a kid.
I'm afraid of everything, so I can relate to that.
But it was this sort of foreboding fear that something was going to get me, you know, and I didn't know what it was, and I never had vivid imagery of like a monster killing me. It was just this sort of unbelievable fear that something's behind me, something's about to get me, something's right over there, something's around that corner. And so things that were horror adjacent as a kid were terrifying. But also, I couldn't stop thinking about them or wanting to associate with them in some way. So when I found stuff like Sweeney Todd and the Phantom of the Opera, it's very hard to be scared of Broadway. You know, like
when they're singing too.
The fear of it is taken away a little bit when it goes into a show tune. You know what I'm saying? Like it takes the fangs off a little bit. And even though in totality, Sweeney Todd is obviously much more chilling in the way that the songs are written, and intentionally by Sondheim, a lot of things are done in a way to make it sound spooky. It was the little bit of kitsch that was there, and the fact that you have to understand, I'm a child of the 90s, so like Mrs. Potts from Beauty and the Beast is the voice that's on this record because Angela Lansbury is, So and the other funny thing was Len Carew, who played Sweeney in the original production. By the time I'm a kid, he's most known for doing the voiceovers on Major League Baseball VHSs. Right. So I'm watching the home run race between Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire, and I hear Len Carew talking.
Not so scary.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced he's not murdering people. Right. So it was a great introduction to having something that I loved that was scary, but was maybe a little bit of a paper tiger, and then it goes into like Famous Monsters from the Misfits, very cartoony, all this stuff that was scary adjacent, but not terrifying. And then that kind of helped me in a weird way. That was therapeutic for me to discover Sweeney Todd.
I just went to see Pinball Wizard, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be weird if everybody was singing everything in life? You just walked up to people and started singing. Yeah. And then it definitely is not scary. It's just weird.
There's a weird moment in Grease 2 that I always think about where one of the characters stops singing, or all the characters stop singing except for the main character, who continues to sing. And then everybody's looking at that character like, oh, what are they doing? And they never comment on it again in the movie. And it made me think like they accidentally, systematically took down the whole idea of musicals. Right. Because if one person is self-conscious about singing, then the whole town must be as well. And what were you just doing?
Amazing. So walk me through at that point up until you started your own band, because it was first called Andy Biersack, right? It really wasn't called Black Veil Brides early on.
Well, that was just Danzig. It was like, okay, well, I got a German sort of aggressive sounding last name, so we'll call this, there's Danzig, we'll call it Biersack. Yeah. And there was a singular show of Biersack.
Just one.
One show in North Side in Cincinnati, which was at the time like this sort of avant-garde, cool neighborhood, in an art gallery, and there was 75 bands on it, and nobody wanted to play last, but I was 14 or 15, and they were like, hey, do you want a headline? And I go, oh, of course. So we had to wait till like 2 a.m. and play to nobody.
Never good.
We didn't have a drummer, so my dad called a favor upon his friend Frank, who drummed in one of his bands. So it was a couple of 14-year-olds and a 40-year-old man drumming, playing exclusively Alkaline Trio and Misfits covers.
Amazing.
And I had my hair, big Liberty spikes, and I think at that show I wore batting gloves and a black tuxedo shirt with a white bow tie. I was like, this is my stage look.
Always a good look.
Yeah. And I made a bunch of like David S. Pumpkins looking like Halloween decorations that I surrounded the stage with. And, that was like, but once we did that, I was like, I have to do this all the time. So then it became, what's the next thing you can do? So then it was High School Battle of the Bands. So by the time High School Battle of the Bands that year rolls along, the name is now Black Veil Brides. And we made it to the finals. We lost in the finals to another band. I don't believe that they're still together.
I was going to say, where's that band now? But I guess
I don't think things worked out as much. If I'm wrong, apologies. I mean, look, you've already won that. But that was where I also took something from Kiss, which is I remember there was a story about Sean Delaney and Bill Aucoin printed Kiss shirts and would hand them out to the people that would come to see them at the Coventry or the Daisy or whatever. And so when industry people would come in, they would trick them into thinking that all these people were Kiss fans because everyone loves a free T-shirt.
Brilliant, yeah.
So my dad and I went to a place called Stephen Barry's, which was a store that existed back then that was for like gross colored clothing that nobody wanted. And it was called like Collegiate Apparel. Okay. And they had no licenses, but they would print like Boston on like a lime green T-shirt, and then they like any of the ones that weren't printed on, they would just have stacks of like mauve and green and yellow, like things that nobody wanted to use that were just T-shirt blanks, and you'd get them for cheap. So my dad helped me, got like a stack of pink and brown and green shirts, and then I went and to like a Michael's Crafts, and I bought an emulsion kit, and I learned how to screen print, and I made Black Veil Brides logos, and I hand screen printed 150 shirts. And every night at the High School Battle of the Bands, I would hand out before the show these disgusting looking Black Veil Bride shirts. And so the first band would come out of the night, and they'd look out at the crowd and see everyone in the whole crowd's wearing Black Veil Bride shirts. And that was like my mind game.
Great marketing actually early on too, right? It's amazing. So at that point, you start doing this, and you decided to move to LA. I think at like 17 or so, right? You just figured like Ohio it's not going to happen for me in Ohio, and
well, it just became clear to me. The ticking clock started for me in 2005. I came out to LA with my mom. In art school, they would send scouts to the school, and the idea was at the time, this is like Dawson's Creek era. So they were always looking for what they called Midwestern kids. So they would send talent scouts to the art schools in the Midwest to try to find kids that could fit onto these, Warner Brothers TV procedural shows about teenagers.
Right.
And I didn't look like a Midwestern kid, but I came in and I did a monologue from Jimmy Stewart's Harvey. And they were just so intrigued by this weird goth kid that wanted to act. And so they asked me to come out, and we had like 2 or 3 weeks in LA, and I booked a Montana Meth was a PSA directed by Tony Kaye, who directed American History X.
Amazing director.
And he liked me because he said it looked like I was a heroin addict, which is an odd thing for a 14-year-old to hear.
Not sure that's a compliment to 14.
But I was down, and then we did it, and I got to wear all this crazy prosthetic makeup, and then I booked an AT&T ad and a couple other things, and then it was time to go home because, my parents both worked full time. We couldn't just stay in LA. But at that point, I had already had the bug, and I had met all these actor kids. I was hanging out with people that have now gone on to become pretty substantially famous, and I was so envious that they got to stay there and work and do stuff, and I had to go back to Ohio. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to double down on music. And then I get back to Ohio and I tell everybody that's in every iteration of the band, okay, this is the date I'm moving to LA. And everybody's like, we're going to come with you. And then over time, that number dwindled to 0 people are coming with me. And I'm like, all right, it's time to go, guys. And no one's coming with me.
Were your parents supportive at that point? Or they're like, we're not sure if this is something you should do, or, what, go to LA, we're 100% behind you.
I was singularly minded from the time I was about 3. And
amazing.
I remember my mom always tells the story of the first time, my first checkup with a pediatrician, they asked me what I was going to do. And I said I was going to be an internationally known rock star.
Amazing.
And they laughed and said, oh, okay, but that's not really like a job that you can do. And I got so angry because I remember, and I'll never forget it, Gene Simmons actually was on one of the VHS tapes. I used to watch Gene and Paul every day when I got home from school. It was like they were like my teachers. And I would watch them talk about what it takes to do this and who they are as people. And I remember one of the two of them saying something about it's not, rock stars are not shit out of the sky by some deity. They're people who work really hard and have a little bit of luck, and they can do. And it stuck in my mind. So I told my pediatrician this: I can do it. Anybody can do it. And so that was always the thought. And then the time came for me to leave, and I had gotten really lucky in that I had one of those whirlwind childhood relationships where the girl that I had fallen head over heels in love for at the time was an actress, and she had some stability in LA, and we were both around the same age. She was a year or two older than me, but she had gotten so far in her career that she had an apartment. So I had the stability of, I can go, and now in retrospect, mooch off of this person. Right. At the time, I was so love struck. I was like, I'm going to go be with this person. And then I, now in retrospect, if it wasn't for that relationship, which ultimately didn't work out because we were kids and, it was a chaotic thing. But if it weren't for that opportunity, I wouldn't have been able to get to LA. But because that didn't work out, ultimately, I ended up living in my car pretty quickly. But at the time, because I had that situation, they at least knew that I had somewhere that I was going. And so I said goodbye to them at the airport, and they knew that I was going to live with this girl, and and they knew her, and that we had a good situation, and which is, by the way, in retrospect, kind of ridiculous for 2 teenagers to be living together in an apartment, like 2 people that are not old enough to know how to function. But we made it work for a time, and ultimately, I ended up living in my car and for a short period, and then bouncing around to couches and living with people for whatever money I could get together for a month. I remember at one point I was renting a 5x10 space on someone's floor for $200 a month.
What is that? Just the floor?
They pointed out the area on the floor that was mine.
Did they draw it out or something?
In North Hollywood.
Okay.
And
this is the craziest story I've ever heard. By the way.
They allowed me to live in that box.
Okay.
And
what was the rent on that?
It was $200 a month.
Okay, for just the space. On
Yes.
the
It
floor.
also meant that I could be in the house. I could use their bathroom, whatever. But like that was my space. Now the problem was, at the time, it was sort of a contentious marriage that was going on between the two people that were there.
Okay.
So anytime that they would get into any kind of argument,
I
would have to leave my little space and just stand outside because I had nothing else.
Yeah.
So, and then eventually I ended up getting my car from Ohio. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to go live in the car. And I discovered that you can't live. I first went and parked in the Kmart parking lot in North Hollywood. And I thought, okay, this will be where I live.
Right.
By the way, I'm lying to my parents the whole time. Every time they call me, everything's great.
I live in a mansion.
I used to go to an internet cafe and I made up a fake label person that would email them and say like, we want to sign Andy. Everything's going great. He's the best, just to buy myself time. And I discovered you couldn't live in a parking lot. But what I figured out is if you go to these lockout rehearsal spaces, nobody checks the cars because people are there 24 hours.
Yeah.
So I go... And the version of the band at the time, I'd pulled together a couple people and we pulled our money and rented one of these lockouts. And I'd sleep in my car in the parking lot. And at the time, I don't know what was going on in his life, but Chris Holmes from W.A.S.P was living in his lockout. Okay. So that became my friend. I'm 18-year-old Andy and Chris Holmes, who's like at the peak of, craziness in his life, whatever.
I mentioned to you before we got on, when I was 14, I went to LA. The first gig I think I ever saw was W.A.S.P at the Troubadour.
Yeah.
I'm a kid. I walk in. First of all, I don't know how I got in. I was 14.
Sure.
Blackie Lawless is throwing raw meat at the audience.
Yeah.
There's blood
Did you get
everywhere.
hit with meat?
I tried to duck.
A little bit of blood came.
And I'm just like, what? I think I met David Lee Roth at the bar at the Troubadour and like Quiet Riot. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I'm moving to LA.
Yeah.
But you obviously became friends with them, which is at that point, it was the height of craziness in LA, right?
Yeah. I mean,
what year was that?
This was 2009.
Okay.
So Chris Holmes is like, before, I think he got sober after then. So he's like building guitars out of wood pieces in his loft, and it's like this sort of Howard Hughes thing where like he lives in this space. The nicest dude, he'd bring me bags of ice. He'd knock on my window. My
no food, just bags of ice.
I had a 98 Cadillac Eldorado that barely ran. And I would sleep in the back and he would knock on the thing and I would go, there was a 7-Eleven around the corner, and at night, they don't still do this, I've been told, because I've told this story before and people say it doesn't work. But in those days, in the Valley, you could go to a 7-Eleven at night and they would throw away all the taquitos and shit.
Okay.
And if you came at the right time and they liked you, you could get pizza slices, taquitos, whatever. So I lived exclusively off of like Junior Mints and old taquitos and shit that was being thrown out at 7-Eleven. And then bags of ice from Chris Holmes. But yeah, I mean, it was a time. And then we got our first manager, and within a couple weeks, he dropped us. He called us and said, "There's nothing here for you," because we couldn't get booked. And then that's how, by the way, I'm now segueing back into the first thing I said, which is how we got our first ever show in LA, because we couldn't get booked anywhere, was Tony Alva and Richard Villa, who ran the Alva Skate Shop and art installation place in LA, allowed us to play in the parking lot.
So at that point, you were 16 or 17. You had a manager. He drops you. You're almost...
He said, and I quote, "Nothing's going to happen for you guys."
Right.
So, again, I don't know what's going on with him, but I feel like maybe bet on the wrong horse. I don't know.
So you're kind of living with Chris Holmes.
Kind of living with Chris Holmes, kind of living in my car.
So how does it happen for you that you meet the other guys and you eventually start to get some traction?
So things move along at a pretty rapid pace at this point. Once we start getting some attention in LA, I'm introduced to Jinx, and then Jinx is in the band for a time, and then he introduces me to Jake, who's his friend, and then Jake introduces us to Cece, and we just it's one of those things where once people start to see that you got something going on, then they kind of perk up a little bit, and they're like, hey, this could be, but then it got to the point where the growth started to outpace our ability to even keep up with it on that time, because I go from absolutely nothing, and I'm still broke, but now all of a sudden there's a tension where I can't get. I remember spending the only money I had to get Roadrunner Records to look at a press kit of ours, and we got an email from a guy at Roadrunner who was like, "Oh, I think I can run this up the chain." I spent all the money we had to make a press kit, old school press kit, sent it to him. Never heard another thing. years later, subsequently, I got an email from the guy like, hey,
I still have it.
yeah, still got it. Thanks for sending that. But all of a sudden, we ended up getting this deal with a small subsidiary of Victory. And once you have that elusive record deal, regardless of whether it was a big deal, record deal or not, we had a record deal and maybe other people in the neighborhood didn't, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
what was that record deal like?
it was not a well-structured record deal.
Right. Was it like $600 and a can of beer? Or
Yeah,
something?
if you listen to our first record, you can hear how much money we got for that record. But it was somebody who believed in us, man, and that just didn't happen. Everywhere I went, there's people that I work with now who I remember seeing them say negative stuff in the past. Not people that I've chosen to work with, but tangentially are related because some company bought some other company, and then all of a sudden you go, wait a second. That guy is now part of my business in some way. That guy said that I sucked in 2009. It was just so hard to get anybody to believe. So all of a sudden, somebody believed, and I was just ready to take whatever deal was available. I'm a kid. I'm literally a teenager, and so we signed this deal, and we met Jake, who then has gone on to become the lead guitar player, principal writer in the band when it came to all the musical side of things, and he was working at Verizon. So we came up with this ridiculous thing for him to tell Verizon that it was horrible in retrospect. Like he had 3 or 4 deeply, gravely sick family members and he needed to leave for an amount of time so we could go on tour. So we meet Jake and like a week later, we're all riding together in a car through winter streets, going on tour to bars and clubs. And
who books you that tour at that point? Because you don't even have a manager.
That's all we had. We had 2 things. We had an attorney. I think we got an attorney first.
Okay.
Dean LaPolte, had found out about us through Nikki Sixx's bass tech, who had taken a shine to us in some capacity. And she was just going to take a flyer as a favor to him to meet with us. And then she met with us and she told me that I reminded her of Cher. And which, take what you want from that.
The young Cher or the old Cher?
Maybe all Chers. Certainly, I'll take any era Cher. But she said I was like Cher.
I don't really see the comparison, but
you'll have to talk to Dina,
yeah, okay.
But Dina is one of those people who has fiercely believed in me and fought for me from the time I was a kid. And she said, we're going to get you a manager. We're going to get you a booking agent. We're going to get you everything. And I'm going to figure out how we can deal with this deal that you signed before you met me because it was not a good deal. So she came in, restructured our deal, made it so that we weren't screwed for the rest of our life. And through that, introduced us to Ash Alvidson, who ultimately became our booking agent. And then Blasco, who I had a meeting with. I'll never forget the day. The girl that I was dating at the time, we're still together, and we're in my Cadillac. And we're driving down Ventura to his old office. And the car stalled out or broke down every day. But we're like 3 miles, middle of summer, on Ventura, peak traffic, like Sushi Row area. Got to get all the way to the other side, the 405. Totally breaks down. Fuck. Okay, black smoke coming out of the hood. I got to get out of the car, push it with her behind the wheel, the remaining distance to get to this meeting. So the first time I ever meet this manager, who's now my manager to this day,
we know each other.
I'm sweating. Yeah. I'm covered in black soot from the car. And I go, hey, man, I just pushed my car to get her to meet with you. And I guess he took a shine to me because of that. He thought that was so cool in punk rock. But yeah, we had those 3 things in place. We went on a regional tour and it was kind of off to the races from there.
Some crazy stories. You played like a hookah bar early on. Your car got towed or something in Chicago?
Yeah, so we played a hookah bar in Chicago, like the suburbs. And I'll never forget it because our opening act was a guy who he used a projector to project old like Filmation cartoons.
Okay.
And he had a box full of change, and that was a snare drum. And then he played a guitar with 2 strings. And he played his song. It's been in my head for 25 years. I like Star Wars. I like Star Trek. Bring it back. Bring it back. Bring it back. Just those lyrics over and over again for 30 minutes.
Could have been a hit.
And then we played. Very different set. But on the way out of there, got T-boned. We went into the city, got T-boned, right? What's that park, the big park in Chicago, where Obama gave his inauguration? I want to say
Grant Park, I think.
Grant Park, there you go.
I think so.
So get stuck in Grant Park overnight, me and my friend at the time, Chris, who was the other writer of the band with me. And we're kids. We have no cell phones. We have no way of telling our parents what's going on. We had somehow got a carton of cigarettes on the way out. So we're having people like messing with us. These two kids stuck in this giant like park overnight, and we started trading cigarettes like for protection with like, you know, unhoused people in the park. Finally get through to the morning. Somebody gets a hold of our parents. They drive up, take us home. But it was just always stuff like that. There was always some chaos going on in those days.
Someone towed the car.
You know what's funny is I see sometimes, and you can't read comments because, like, you know, if I read comments, I would be long gone because I mean the internet has been shitting on me for 20 years. But
I do like that mean tweets though. If you ever seen that on like Kimmel.
But somebody said recently on the new video, and a buddy of mine sent this to me because we were laughing about it, knowing these stories about my life.
Yeah,
they go, industry plan. And I go, what? Could not be farther from. Could not be farther from. Didn't benefit from any nepotism and was trading cigarettes for protection in parks as a kid.
Is it hard? Because you have incredible fans, right? But you also, the band is very polarizing.
Sure.
Is it hard to deal with those reactions sometimes of the love and the hate at the same time? Or do you not read any of it because you just don't want to know? There's a lot of love too.
I think that I would be disingenuous to say that I don't ever get affected by negativity.
Yeah.
I've just gotten better at it over the years in terms of being able to compartmentalize it and make it be something that is I can more often than not laugh at than something that gets me angry. I think that if I were angry all the time about every negative thing that was ever said about me, I would not spend a lot of time happy, if you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
And so yeah, it sucks to work really hard on something and to earnestly try your best so that someone who's never made anything can take a big shit on it on the internet. But that's the world we live in. And the problem is people struggle to realize this. We live in this sort of economy of if you say something negative about somebody's thing that they make, it's almost like you're casting out a line to make a friend in a way. Because so many people love the idea of going, I hate this. Is anybody else going to hate this too? And then somebody else goes, I also hate this. And then voila, you've now been validated by somebody else for the shit thing that you said. And now you have a friend and then they can talk shit. And then it just becomes this sort of endless cycle. And I think if people started to see that internet hate is more about
maybe validation.
Exactly. It's a really fucked up and weird version of it. But all of us are constantly seeking some connectivity in this world. And the unfortunate thing is that is developed into, if I hate on something in the right way or say something savage enough about somebody else will agree or validate it or laugh at it, and then I'll have won something. Because even though I've never created anything, I can win the day by shitting on this thing that was created. So I think if you can't see that for the structure that it is, you can start to get like, well, what? I tried so hard and what? But at this point, it's just, I kind of feel like I'm not above it. I just know what's happening.
Though I always say this, nobody would ever come up to you in person and say, I don't like your band. You suck. Like,
no one ever has.
Happen. It would never happen.
Never has.
It's just because it's faceless in a way. I think people feel comfortable to hide behind the anonymity of like a weird meme or whatever it may be and think I could say this because there are no consequences. But at the end of the day,
or say something that disappoints people all the time. I'm constantly disappointing to people. I can tell you that on this meet and greet, we do 150 person meet and greet a day. 0 people have come up and told me how disappointed they are.
No, they're paying to meet you too.
But my point is, if you've paid the money, then you almost have earned the opportunity. If there's ever if I'm in AutoZone and you come up and say you're disappointed in me, can you leave me alone? I'm in AutoZone. But if I'm in a room that you've paid to come in and this is your chance, if you're truly so disappointed in me, make that the theme of the discussion.
Yeah.
You've paid for the opportunity. But it never, ever, ever happens because the internet is this whole other sort of world that it can be very hard for younger people especially to understand the distinction between what happens in real life versus what happens on the internet. And even I didn't realize it until very recently. You know, there'd be weeks that would go by where I would do something, say something, something would come up, whatever. And I would be so concerned that, oh no, everybody hates me now. And then we'd be on tour and that thing, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and then something else happens. And it's just this, you're in this constant battle to stay on top of this sort of thing that's impossible to predict or whatever else. And I think that the great tragedy that has become of this, or that has come from this, is people feel like they need to be infallible and they need to be perfect and without fault, and they need to have a stance on everything that's the exact right stance, and they need to have the exact right thing to say when something happens in the world or whatever else. Because if they don't, then their whole audience will leave them. And that has made it so, generally speaking, everyone is really sort of anodyne and boring because nobody can say anything for fear of upsetting everybody.
Especially now, I would never want to be a comedian. It'd be the worst time in the world to be a comedian ever.
Yeah, and you can't even acknowledge that something makes you laugh.
Yeah.
Because something that made you laugh
It's going to offend someone.
may have, not even that, the person that made you laugh may have at one time been on a podcast with somebody who was on a podcast that said something that you don't agree with. And how could you? So it's just gotten to the point where I've been screaming since 2013. I am incredibly insecure and fucked up, and I try my best, and I would love more than anything to be a good person and positive and ethical and moral. And I try really hard, but there are going to be some times where I'm wrong about something or I said something wrong. I was a huge asshole when we first got popular.
I was going to ask you, was it hard for you to stay grounded at that point? When
you
got
can't
popular?
give a 19-year-old a world where you're successful in rock music and you're constantly told that you're attractive, and you're constantly told that you have the microphone, and you're constantly cheered for everywhere you go. Like, that's the recipe to create one of the worst people in the whole world.
Right.
And I lived up to that for some time. And it took a lot of my life. It took a lot of experience and time. I would give my wife a tremendous amount of credit in terms of helping me to find myself. That's the version of me that is more true to me, the version of me that just loves to buy action figures and watch the Bengals, and not have to push myself to, and I mention her in particular because we're both lead singers, right? And we were both crazy people when we got together.
Yeah.
And our growth happened at the same time where we were both like, we need to become the best versions of ourselves. And so we moved past it. But there was a whole period in my life when I'm sure I was mean or shitty to half the people in a day. But right now in my life, I want to be nice. And I want to be nice to people that come to the shows. And I'm going to try my hardest, but I'm not always going to know what to do or say.
When you look back in the Golden Gods and you won 3 awards, the speech you gave, do you feel like that was a time in my life that I sort of regret that speech, or you feel like at the moment that made sense?
I regret it, the contents being about somebody's body and weight.
Yeah.
But when you're 3 things, when you wrote a song about your grandfather's death and then that song wins an award, and you're going to give a speech that you wrote about his death and you're so excited to honor him, and then you get really drunk beforehand, and then everyone in the whole crowd boos you and spits on you before the cameras pick it up. Because what people don't realize is
we didn't see that.
We had to stand at the barricade for 20 minutes while the changeover happened at the commercial break. And then they brought up Sebastian to present the award. And at that time, the audience already knows that we're winning the award. And the audience is people who have been waiting around all day to watch Metallica and could give a shit about what's happening at this award show. And now they've got to sit through this band that they hate, give some big speech about their song. So they were already spitting, throwing, booing. All of a sudden, I come up on stage and it looks like I've just heel turned out of nowhere. But it was kids putting raw fish in my lockers, and it was people making fun of us, or bands ripping on us. The singer of Five Finger Death Punch, using the F slur about us on Facebook every other day, or, whatever band is saying some terrible thing about us every day. And it was all those things built together to where my cup had run over with anger, and I turned into, as Chris Jericho described, a professional wrestler heel turn. And I don't regret doing that, because if you're not going to stand up for yourself, who is going to? And that's the thing beyond anything else that I want people to understand about what our message is. In this world today, we exist in the capacity where there are a lot of people who really earnestly want to be the person that they are. And I believe that they should be. But I also want everyone that listens to me to know that you need to stand up for yourself and insist on the person that you are. You cannot let other people take away from the way in which you see yourself, the things you like, the way you want to dress, the things you listen to. You can't let them take that away from you. And you cannot assume that they are going to agree with who you are. When I was a kid, I was told that by my dad. You can't assume that people are going to love your Clockwork Orange outfit. Right. But if you're a kid that wears a black veil shirt to school, you cannot assume that you're never going to get fucked with. And I'm sorry about that, but that's just the way the world is. What you should do is know that you love this band and don't let those people tell you that you shouldn't listen to this band.
And lyrically, the concept of revenge has always been a big thing for you, right? So we should talk about that, because there's probably 10 or 15 people that you would still hate at this point,
Sure,
right?
yes.
You can't talk about who they are, but there probably are 10 or 15 people that you'd love to get revenge on.
Yeah, I'm not going to listen. I almost did names, but I'm not going to.
We could, but that would be another podcast.
Some of them I got small revenge.
Yeah. Isn't the best revenge just success in a way?
I was kicked out of the vocal music department at the School for Creative and Performing Arts in Cincinnati because the leader of the vocal music department said that I was not a singer. I got to go back a number of years ago to visit the school because I'm listed as a notable alumni on their Wikipedia, despite the fact that I was kicked out of the school and did not graduate. I got to go back because David Roth, who was the head of the drama department there, is a top, if there was a Mount Rushmore of people who were impactful in my life and believed in me, it was David Roth, who was the drama department head and my teacher at that school. Still to this day, I talked, the other day he was sending my mom stuff about the Playbill article about our music video. The opposite side of that is the head of the vocal music department, who I did get to walk into his office and say, "You'll never guess what I do for a living." So little small
I'm
revenge.
playing the forum.
Yeah, little small revenge pieces there. But what I have found is that you never get what you want out of revenge, and it's so infuriating because you want so badly to have that moment where you're going to get back at somebody and they're going to see, and then they just turn around and all these, cincypunk.org and all these things. When I was a kid, they'd make fun of us and lambast us. 9 times out of 10, those people, "Oh, you know what? I'm a big fan of you. I used to be on that website. It's crazy you guys have made it so big." And I go, don't you understand that you're my mortal enemy and you're supposed to feel shame?
Meanwhile, Kerrang is saying whatever, but you're on the cover. So at that point,
it's just hard. It's hard when you're somebody who always wanted to get back at your demons and your enemies, and then you're winning a race. But the good thing for me is that Black Veil has never fully won the race because, the comments of this video will show there will always be people that, regardless of what we do, just hate me regardless. And that's fine. I think the worst thing you can be as an entertainer, someone who's given the keys to this kingdom, is to not be divisive enough for someone to have an opinion on you. My job is only to entertain.
That's true.
That's it. I'm only on stage to entertain you. And by the way, if you hate me and you watch this video or anything else,
that's all that matters.
I have still entertained you because I gave you something to watch for a while to go, I fucking hate this guy. So there is no way to get the restitution that you want, and that sucks, but I'll always be seeking it.
And you're sober.
I am sober.
I'm sober too. I don't even drink coffee. I drink these. Have you ever had these before?
No.
It's actually
Magic Mind. Can I have this?
Mental alertness. I'll do a shot with you if you want.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Instead of drinking coffee, this is what I drink. They're amazing. But yeah, talk to me about sobriety.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Oh, shit. I spilled on my pants.
Sorry. I love this energy shot. It's for mental clarity. It's called Magic Mind. Use the code LIPS. That's LIPPS. MagicMind.com. Use the code LIPS. So talk to me about what it means to be sober, because
you know what's good about all black pants and black clothes?
You can't tell.
I just spill shit on myself all the time. If you were to take a magnifying glass, there's barbecue sauce and all kinds. Sobriety for me it's interesting because it's different for everybody, right? And mine boiled down to, I was drinking because at around 20 years old, 19 years old. In fact, I know I was 19 because I remember the first time that I actually drank. And I discovered that if I drank, so much of the social anxiety that I had and the fear of being around people would go away. And by the way, in my line of work at 19 years old, going to the Rainbow and all this stuff, to be able to socialize and talk to people was kind of part of the job. So I go, it's magic. My innate difficulty, my sort of the feeling because of being neurodivergent and the feeling of having a difficulty attaching myself to other people. If I drink this juice here, I can
Not Magic Mind.
No, if I drink this whatever,
Yeah.
I can talk to people. And then, like anything, it became, well, now I'm hyper fixated on this because, as with action figures and Sweeney Todd, whatever it is, I go all in on something. So now I'm gonna figure out exactly what my drink is. I'm gonna get 3 tattoos of the logo of it. I'm gonna obsess over it. Every show I'm gonna drink all the time. This is gonna be my full brand. I'm gonna be drunk all day. Oh, and now I'm gonna institute a thing where it's a fun thing to drink a whole 5th before I go on stage every day. And if I don't finish the 5th, then it's a failure, and everybody has to like laugh at me and it just became, I'm gamifying it, and it's just like it's. Like anything else now in retrospect, because I've been sober for 8 years, I can realize what I was doing. But at the time, I didn't realize I was doing what I do with Batman and comic books and everything else, where I invest myself into these things. And I was doing that with alcohol. And I did it for so long that it became a crutch. And then I thought I couldn't perform without it. And then in 2014, end of 2013, early 2014, actually before that, it was mid 2013 and then through to the end of 2014. I had broken my ribs in 2011. I jumped off stage and I smashed all my ribs. 9, 10, 11. 11th rib totally gone. I went on tour right away. Finished the show, went on tour, did a Warped Tour, never did any physical therapy, nothing. Around mid 2013, I'm driving, I'm sitting on the 405, and my legs go completely numb while I'm driving. Numbness, legs, my waist all the way down. And I just get to the side of the road, freaking out. Feeling comes back to the legs after about an hour, but I still can't feel things, right? So I look up on the internet, what are causes of not being able to feel your legs and blah, blah, blah. So and this is like 2013 Google MD, this is before we all realized that everything on there is incorrect. Yeah.
Right.
And so I'm just going down the list of what are the possible ailments that I have. And of course, I've now convinced myself I have all of them. So I go to just a regular general doctor. At the time, I don't have like a doctor that I go to. I don't have medical insurance. I'm a kid. So go to a regular doctor. They have no idea what's going on. They say, well, could be that you need to go to a urologist. So I go, okay. They're convinced that I have a UTI. That's what they're saying. And they say, take a bunch of cranberry and go to a urologist. So mind you, I have no feeling in my up down to my knees sometimes, and then other times down all the way to my feet. And they're saying it's probably
Drink some cranberry juice.
Yeah. So go to your urologist. The urologist does the finger up the ass.
Which is always fun.
Yeah, it's awesome, especially when you're 22 to be, And
I've been there.
They go, we're going to get our finger up your ass and we're going to mess around in there. And then we're going to take a blood test and we're going to see what's going on with your blood. They do that. They take a blood test. They say it's inconclusive. But just to be sure, you're going to need to come back every single week for the next 3 weeks. And we're going to do this thing up your ass every time. But now we're going to start doing the scope. So we're making a record at the time, and I have to leave the studio like in the middle of the day every day to drive to the valley to go have a camera and a thumb stuck up my ass, and then go back to the studio and try to work. And at that point, it's so painful. It's so terrible. I am so exhausted by the whole thing that I'm just drinking constantly to deal with that. Like now I'm not drinking because I'm trying to get rid of social anxiety. I'm drinking because I'm always in pain. I can't feel my legs, and my job now is to have someone shove things up my ass. Right. And so finally they go, well, we don't know what it is, but we're going to put you on this medication because we think you might have a blood infection. That's what I'm told. It's a blood infection. So they put me on this medication that subsequently has been banned by the FDA, the medication that I was on. There was something like a 6 to 10% suicide rate, crazy things. And I say to the doctor, can I drink on this medication? And he said a couple glasses would be okay. Now, in retrospect, he was saying a couple glasses of wine. But at 22, yes. So I'm like, well, a couple full glasses of whiskey, like that's a lot of shots. So I'll just keep drinking like normal. So I'm drinking like normal, but the problem is you absolutely cannot drink on this medication, not even wine. I've subsequently found this out. I lose my mind. And I don't mean in the sense that I'm doing crazy things. I mean that I am not there. I'm losing long tracks of time. I'm
blacking out.
I'm
assume.
Blair Witch, standing in the corner. My tour manager's finding me in weird places. Lobby call happens to go from point A to point B. I'm sitting in the lobby with none of my bags or anything. Things aren't occurring to me. Can't remember songs. I basically don't remember a single moment from 2014. And I'm on this medication the whole year. Oh, just constantly. I'm going through long stretches of blackouts. And then I'm drinking because I'm so upset. I'm drinking until I black out. And then
is that your wake-up call or no?
So I start standing. We're on tour, and I just start standing at windows, and I'm consciously thinking of like 6 different ways that I could kill myself just looking out this window. And I've never been suicidal, and I'm not actively having these thoughts. There's such destructive thoughts that are happening. They're like happening to me. And I'm getting freaked out by this. And I go, I don't feel this way, but I can't stop. Everything is manifesting into the darkest possible thoughts. So I get done with that run and I go, something has to change. So for me, I was very fortunate that I never was someone that was drinking I never got the shakes. I could go long times without drinking, but I drank to exist. The only way I could become Andy was to drink in my mind. I couldn't go on stage. I couldn't sit here with you and do anything if I wasn't drunk. And I realized I have to try. So we go and do Warped Tour the following summer, and it was the first tour I ever did not drinking. And I go, holy shit. It is so much better to do a show when you're not blacked out. And my wife was also struggling significantly with alcohol at the time. And we both made the decision together. Because I stopped drinking, then I would start drinking again, stop drinking. And we both made the decision together.
In a way, you probably had to go through that to get sober.
We had big crazy moments, and we had plenty of times where we would get into a big crazy Sid and Nancy argument or something because we were both drunk or whatever, and that just wasn't us. And we realized together, this is it. And our love for each other is way more important than this dumb thing, and our careers are way more important than this dumb thing. So why are we allowing this dumb thing even into our house? So we did it together, and we continue to do it together. And it's been the greatest thing that's ever happened to both of us. And for me, it's changed my life. It's changed my career. It's changed me as a person. I'm significantly less of a piece of shit than I used to be. And I love living the life that I get to have.
Amazing. Well, talk to me about the new record, the tour, because obviously you just put out, Bleeders, which was a great track. The video is amazing.
Thank you.
Based on Sweeney Todd.
Yeah.
There's a tour coming up with Falling in Reverse. Ronnie Radke, I guess you guys are probably friends for years, right?
Known him since I was 16. I met him at a show in Cincinnati.
Another polarizing individual.
Very much so, yeah. But it's funny. I think you brought up David Lee Roth earlier. I've always said that Ronnie is a little like our scene's David Lee Roth.
That's
in a way.
True. That's a great comparison.
But from the time I've known him, he was always sort of that way. I remember the first time I met him, he walked up to me and started saying something along the lines of like, "There's only one of us can be Nikki Sixx. You can't also be Nikki Sixx."
I never thought of him as Nikki Sixx.
If you look at like the Drug and Me Is You era, especially, I remember because we did Warped Tour when he first put out that record, and he and I kind of had like the exact same hair walking by each other, the very Nikki Sixx hair. But I've always thought of him as, I think sometimes when people are so divisive and things that they say are things that you don't necessarily agree with all the time, or their perspective is wildly different than what is considered a normal perspective to have. In today's day and age, it's seen very differently than in previous times, where I grew up, where so many of the artists that I loved, great example is we talked about Kiss. Kiss would take Ted Nugent on tour, and it never occurred to me that they all must sit backstage and agree on all of their philosophical ideas. You know what I mean? It never was anything to me beyond maybe a mutual respect for music or a timeline or knowing them for a long time, or plainly, when it comes to the perspective of Ronnie, by far and away the most successful person in our scene, and someone that is by far and away one of the most entertaining and maybe only truly charismatic frontmen that we have. Myself excluded, of course. I believe
you're both stars.
I got to put myself in there, but other than us, no. But it's about putting on a show. And the other thing is, I find it interesting. Whether you agree with what somebody says or not, there are people who are objectively comedic in what they do, and the delivery is meant to be comedic. I found it funny because for me to say that I think Ronnie is very funny feels like a pretty obvious statement. He's always had a comedic bend to what he does. And whether what he's saying is completely incendiary or in an attempt to get a rise out of you.
Well, like Kiss did back
sure,
in the day. Right?
But it's so very clear that it's meant to make people go, I can't believe he said that.
Yeah.
Or go, no, I disagree. Or start beef or drama, whatever. But he knows he's doing it and he telegraphs that he's doing it.
Because there was times when you would say our records are better than Zeppelin too.
Exactly.
Back in the day. Right?
And I knew when I said that I liked Set the World on Fire more than Led Zeppelin, that people were going to hate me for it. But I also knew that Kerrang was going to put it on the front cover. And it didn't mean that I truly believed in my heart of hearts that the second record I ever made was better than one of the most important acts in the history of music. But if I wasn't going to say it, then who was? And if Ronnie isn't going to get you angry about something, clearly nobody else is. And I'm not saying there are things that I've told him this. He and I differ philosophically on a great many things. And there are things that I philosophically and socially entirely disagree with him on. But that doesn't exclude the fact that I've known him since I was 16 and I know he has a good heart. And if I thought that he was an evil person who believed bad things, I would have no interest in knowing him. But I know where his heart's at. And I also know that he's very good at getting people very angry.
And the show will be wildly entertaining if you come to the tour.
Look, between the two of us, there's going to be a lot of ego going on.
Yeah.
At the very least, you'll see the greatest display of eyeliner-wearing ego you have ever seen.
Amazing. Well, we do these really fun top fives at the end of the show, so I got a bunch of them for you. Your top 5 hair metal bands of all time, knowing what you grew up on, starting with number 5.
Okay, we're just going to start at the bottom?
At the bottom.
Oh, fuck. Hair metal bands.
That can include the Motley Crues of the world, right?
Glamour Punks. They're a band from LA.
I know them. Yeah. Number 5.
Yeah, I'm going to put them number 5 because they never got very big, but I was obsessed with them when I was a teenager. I found their music. It was hard to find. It was one of those like underground things. And it meant a lot to me because I liked how punk rock they were,
Cool. Number 4.
I'm going to go with a band that is also super underground, but I really enjoyed. And unfortunately, the drummer passed, and we got to know him a little bit, but Peppermint Creeps from LA. They were another great glam revival band that were behind, they came too late, but they were a great band.
Number 3.
Gotta go W.A.S.P.
Amazing. Still great to this day.
Still great.
Pretty good, I would say. I mean,
and again, another guy who I could not disagree with on more things philosophically than Blackie Lawless.
I don't think a lot of people agree with him on a lot of things.
I would absolutely go to the damn show and sing along to "I Want to Be Somebody," because it doesn't whatever. But I'm also apparently that I'm in the minority in that capacity. But regardless, not of people that would go sing with Blackie, meaning the people that would be willing to accept that someone disagrees with them. Anyway. Number 2. This is just for me, right? This is not.
This is your own list.
Okay, this is not. I want to be clear.
Because sometimes people take this as like the gospel, but this is your list.
This is not gospel. This is not
your list.
Because all the bands I've listed so far have a combined record sales of just W.A.S.P.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
If we pulled all the other bands that I've listed, we're just looking at W.A.S.P's numbers. So I'm talking about how it personally affected me. So number 2, Motley Crue. Particularly early era Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil.
Too Fast for Love?
Too Fast for Love, Shout at the Devil in particular, just the very, the very punk rock, the very Mad Max look, the whole thing.
Strange fact, they introduced Nikki to his wife.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool fact.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We worked with Nikki a handful of times early on in the band, and she was around and very, very nice.
Courtney.
Yeah,
She's
very
great.
cool. Courtney's very nice.
Well, great choice. And number 1.
This is going to be a
Greatest
controversial.
hair metal band of all time.
Not a hair metal band, but the band that got me the most interested in the fashion of hair metal. Hair metal adjacent. Everyone's going to boo me because this is kind of a cop-out. Lord's the New Church
Great band.
is my favorite. Look at
Not metal. per
Method
se,
to My
but-
Madness. Watch the music video and tell me that's not a hair metal band.
Yeah, I mean they look amazing. I don't know metal, but they're great.
There is nothing any less metal about Method to My Madness than any Poison song.
Yeah, that's true.
If you watch Method to My Madness, go watch it right now, and then watch Unskinny Bop and tell me which is the metal band.
I never thought of them in the same breath. Poison, Lords in Your Church. But yeah,
Well,
I can get that.
I'm here to make that comparison.
And last but not least, your top 5 lead singers of all time, Andy.
Okay. Peter Steele,
Number 5.
Billy Idol,
Number 4.
Mike Ness,
Number 3.
Matt Skiba, Bruce Springsteen.
Amazing list. By the way, if you like Magic Mind, pick
Everyone
it
has the same tone of voice, by the way. Sorry.
up. If you like Magic Mind, pick it up. Check out Lips in the codes description below. This is great. We have to do another one of these for sure.
Yeah.
Well, the tour's coming up, blackveilbrides.com.
Yeah. Just Google us. You'll find good stuff and not so good stuff.
All great stuff. I have to have you back,
Yeah.
by the way, because I can
Thank
talk to you for hours. This was a
Appreciate
pleasure.
you.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you, friend.
Awesome.